In order to derive the quadratic formula, we will begin with a quadratic equation in standard form. This standard form quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Our first step is to divide by a on both sides of this standard equation in order to have a 1x squared, a 1 for the coefficient of x squared. If we divide by a on both sides, we will have x squared plus b over ax plus c over a equals 0. 0 divided by a is still 0. Our next step is to subtract c over a from both sides to move the constant across to the other side of the equal sign. So subtracting c over a from both sides will give us this step. Now we do the step that seems to be the most mysterious to most students. It is called completing the square. What we are attempting to do is figure out what value needs to be added to the left-hand side of this equation to transform the left-hand side of the equation into a perfect square trinomial. Now, a perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that factors into two equal factors, such as x squared plus 6x plus 9 factors into x plus 3 times x plus 3, or the square of x plus 3, two equal factors. Well, it turns out that what we need to do is take half of b over a, and square that quantity, square that fraction. So that would be b over 2a. When we square that, we square the b, we square the 2, we square the a. So b squared over 4a squared is what needs to be added. So in the next step, we add b squared over 4a squared to both sides. Adding b squared over 4a squared to both sides of our equation gives us this step. Now, notice on the right-hand side of this equation we have two fractions. Those two fractions need to be subtracted. In order to add or subtract fractions, we must have, a common denominator. So, getting a common denominator for the fractions on the right-hand side and putting that together will give us b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. And in the same step, we can also factor the left-hand side. So x plus b over 2a times x plus b over 2a can be written as the square of x plus b over 2a. Moving on to the next step, we're trying to solve for x, remember. We need to take the square root of both sides. So use that square root property. Taking the square root of both sides, we get our next step. So x plus b over 2a is equal to, notice the positive or negative square root, positive or negative symbol in front of there when we take the square root of both sides. Now, we can simplify that denominator, the square root of 4a squared. We can actually simplify that down to 2a. Our next step is to solve for x. Isolating the x, we need to subtract b over 2a from both sides. So subtracting b over 2a from both sides gives us this next step. Notice that the two fractions that we have left in here on the right-hand side already have a common denominator, so we can put these two fractions together into one fraction. So simplifying gives us our final step in this process. Now, this process of completing the square in order to solve a standard quadratic equation to derive the quadratic formula could show up on an exam as a bonus problem. So, understand the process. Memorizing the steps without understanding is very difficult. If you understand the process of completing the square, this should not be difficult. So good luck, and this may show up as a bonus problem.